with the Bennet family living in Longbourn, who is a common English family with their 5 unmarried daughters, a ridiculously insane mother, Mrs. Bennet, and a sarcastic father, Mr. Bennet. The 5 daughters are Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. First, we begin with the eldest daughter, Jane. Jane likes to think nothing and no one is bad, ever. The second Bennet daughter, Elizabeth, called Lizzie by her father, is constantly judging a book by its cover. Moving into Netherfield Park, which is a very expensive estate, is Charles Bingley and Company, which includes his 2 sisters, his best friend Mr. Darcy, and his brother-in-law. Charles is a quiet but sociable young gentleman who is very rich. His sister Caroline, on the other hand, is a snotty, stuck-up, actually very annoying character. Caroline is obsessed with winning over Bingley's best friend, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, who is a man too proud of himself and his family to care about anyone else. In essence, your typical selfish, ignorant, rich dude. Bingley and Company move into Netherfield. The girls are head over heels to meet them, as Mrs. Bennet begs their father to introduce himself because in those times males have to do everything first. After Mr. Bennet gets on his wife's apparent nerves for saying he refuses to meet Bingley, he tells them he has already met the man. Well, as hell are Bingley and Jane fall in love because you can totally fall in love with someone you've known for 5 minutes and dance with twice. Lizzie is sitting out with her best friend Charlotte Lucas when they overhear a conversation in which Darcy claims there is not a beautiful woman in the room, and if there were, it'd be Jane. He continues to say that Elizabeth would not be worth it and insult her. The entire Bennet family, along with others whom they tell, begin to form a community-wide dislike for Darcy and his pride. However, while Mrs. Bennet has already embarrassed everyone, the middle daughter, Mary, who is a conceited, jealous teenager who thinks everyone thinks she's just amazing at singing and playing the piano, decides to show off to everyone, furthermore embarrassing the Bennet family. After the ball, Caroline invites Jane to visit Netherfield, where she gets sick and is ordered by the doctor to stay in bed. Because her mother thinks it will help Bingley and Jane's relationship move faster, she refuses to send a carriage, and Lizzie is forced to walk in order to visit her. This heightens both Darcy's respect and Caroline's dislike for her. As both girls are comfortably home, they learn their cousin Mr. Collins, who is to inherit their property when Mr. Bennet dies, is to pay a visit to the house. His plan is to marry one of the daughters so the property stays within their immediate family. Mrs. Bennet doesn't understand why the girls can't inherit the property anyway, again showing how little knowledge she has about their society, making her sound, if at all possible, more ridiculous than before. Either way, Mrs. Bennet insists that Jane will soon have a husband, so Mr. Collins should go for Lizzie. He does go for Lizzie. She says no. Her father tells her it's a shame that she should lose one parent because her mother will never talk to her again if she doesn't marry Mr. Collins, and if she does, he will never talk to her again. He ends up marrying the Bennet family's neighbor, Lizzie's best friend, Charlotte Lucas. In the meantime, while Mrs. Collins is visiting, the 2 youngest daughters, Lydia and Kitty, become obsessed with officers, going into town as often as possible to see them. One particular officer, Mr. Wickham, spikes their interest. Darcy and the Bingleys leave for London. Elizabeth takes her chance to learn more about Mr. Wickham and Mr. Darcy's relationship. She learns that Lady Catherine de Bourgh, the woman her cousin Mr. Collins works under, is Darcy's aunt. She also learns that Darcy's father was Wickham's godfather. The elder Darcy apparently left his inheritance to Wickham, but it was not granted because Darcy is jealous of his father and Wickham's relationship. In essence, Wickham makes Darcy sound like the meanest person he's ever come into contact with. Later on, Lizzie visits Charlotte and Mr. Collins, where she meets Lady Catherine de Bourgh and her daughter. While there, Darcy admits his love for her, asking her to marry him. She turns him down, claiming he's a huge jerk, not only to herself and Wickham, but to her sister for tearing Jane and Bingley apart. Darcy later gives Lizzie a letter explaining everything, which changes her feelings completely. It turns out Wickham only hates Darcy because Darcy wouldn't allow his sister, Georgiana, to elope with Wickham. While Elizabeth is learning that Wickham was wrong and beginning to fall in love with Darcy, her sister Lydia elopes with Mr. Wickham. Except for her mother, who is glad to have another daughter married, the entire Bennet family disowns Mrs. Lydia Wickham. The family believes Mr. Gardiner, who is Mr. Bennet's brother-in-law, paid off Wickham to marry Lydia in order to save their family. But behind the scenes lurks Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth learns this when she is on vacation with her aunt and uncle Gardiner. They visit the Darcy estate because Darcy isn't supposed to be home. As it happens, Darcy is back early, and though they should hate each other, he asks Elizabeth and the Gardiners to visit again and have lunch with them so Lizzie can meet his sister Georgiana. After the dinner, Darcy gets Elizabeth alone and again professes his love to her, claiming his feelings haven't changed. She admits that she has changed and is in fact in love with him and happy that he could do what he has for her family. She apologizes on behalf of Wickham, and he proposes to her again. She says yes. As he starts to tell Jane, Bingley arrives at their house alone. He wants to speak to Jane privately. He proposes And of course, she says yes. Now that Mrs. Bennet has 3 daughters married, 2 of their husbands being very rich and high in society, she's happier than any mother around. Mr. Bennet is happy for Jane and Lizzie. He's especially happy for Elizabeth because he knows she's happily in love with Darcy, and to her, that is the most important characteristic in a marriage. Book ends. And, oh yeah, Mary's still jealous. The end.